Imagine the scene, a glittering chandelier casting golden light over a table laden with crystal glasses and gourmet dishes in one of Boston's finest restaurants. It's my parents' 40th wedding anniversary, and the air is thick with their smug satisfaction. My father, the self-made tycoon of Parker and Sons, raises his glass, his eyes gleaming with false pride. My mother, draped in diamonds, smiles that razor-sharp smile, while my brother smirks from across the table phone, hidden ready to capture the drama. I'm Emily Parker, 36, the golden daughter who walked away from it all. They see me as the failure, the one who abandoned the family empire for some foolish independence. As the toasts flow, the jabs begin. Subtle at first, Emily's little flower shop must be quaint. Then sharper. My father leans in, voice dripping with disdain. You're a disgrace to this family. The words hang like poison. Betrayal burns in my chest, the years of their hypocrisy, their secrets, their dependence on me. But I don't flinch. I smile, calm as ice. Funny coming from people who still live off my money. Their faces freeze. Confusion flickers, then horror. With a flick of my phone, I cut their credit cards right there mid-dinner. The app chimes confirmation. Silence crashes over the table like a wave broken only by the server's polite cough. My brother's hand trembles on his phone. My mother's lips part in shock. What they didn't know was that this was just the beginning. I'd been preparing for months, uncovering lies that would shatter their world. Stick around, because this story spirals into scandals, hidden debts, a secret sibling, and betrayals that flip everything upside down. By the end, you'll see revenge served cold and justice blooming wild. You won't believe how it all unravels. My name is Emily Parker. At 36, I'm the owner and silent CEO of Wild Bloom Co., a floral empire that supplies luxury bouquets to half the five-star hotels from Boston to Miami. 10 years ago, I walked away from Parker and Sons, the finance firm my father built, and my family still clings to like life rafts, and they've never forgiven me for choosing my own path over their throne. The invitation arrived 3 months ago on heavy cream stock, gold embossed. The kind of stationery that screams old money even when the money is running thin. Celebrating 40 years of love and legacy. It read as if love had anything to do with the arrangement my parents made back in 1985. I knew the moment I opened it that this wasn't a celebration. It was an ambush. Still, I slipped the card into my purse and smiled at my reflection. Game on. Now here I am, seated at a table draped in white linen so crisp it could cut glass beneath a chandelier that costs more than most people's houses. The restaurant is Le Cine Noir, the newest jewel in the Caldwell Hotel Group's crown. And every detail, the murmured French of the waitstaff, the faint scent of truffle drifting from the kitchen, has been chosen to remind the world that the Parkers still belong at the top. My father sits at the head, silver hair gleaming under the lights, his navy suit tailored to perfection. Mother beside him wears the diamond necklace he gave her for their 30th, the one she bragged could sink a ship. My brother Michael, 38, going on 18 lounges to my left. Phone angled just enough beneath the table to catch everything in 4K. His wife, Clarissa, sips champagne and pretends she isn't live tweeting the evening to her society followers. The first course arrives, seared foie gras with fig reduction, and the performance begins. Emily, darling. Mother says, voice honeyed and lethal. How is the little flower shop still keeping you occupied? The word drips with pity, as if arranging roses were one step above cleaning toilets. I smile the way I've practiced in the mirror 100 times. Busier than ever, Mother. We just signed the Waldorf Astoria account. Father chuckles, a low sound that doesn't reach his eyes. Hotels need flowers, I suppose. Though I can't imagine it pays what you were making at Parker and Sons. Such a waste of a Harvard education. Michael snorts. Remember when she thought she could run the acquisitions desk cute phase? Clarissa leans forward, eyes bright with malice. At least she has something to fall back on. Not everyone can marry well. She pats Michael's hand as if he's the prize. I let them talk. I've heard every variation of this script for years. The golden daughter who threw away her birthright, The disappointment who chose pretty weeds over real power. They think they know my story because they wrote the first chapter. They have no idea I've been editing the rest. The main course arrives filet mignon with a red wine reduction that matches the color rising in Father's cheeks as the wine flows. He's on his third glass and the mask is slipping. You know he says loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear some children honor their parents. They build on the foundation laid for them. Others, he turns to me, eyes cold as the marble floor. Others spit on it. You're a disgrace to this family, Emily. A disgrace. The word lands like a slap exactly as he intended. Michael's phone tilts higher. Clarissa's lips part in delight. Mother dabs the corner of her eye with a napkin, the picture of wounded matriarch. For one heartbeat, the old hurt flares years of trying to earn love that was never on offer. Only approval doled out like crumbs. Then I feel it, the calm that comes when you've already won, and they just haven't realized it yet. I set my fork down gently. A disgrace, I repeat, tasting the word. That's rich coming from people who still live off my money. The table goes still. Even the waiter freezes mid-step. Father's brow furrows. What did you say? I pull my phone from my clutch, open the banking app, and turn the screen so they can all see. American Express Black. Visa Infinite. The platinum card you use for the yacht club mother. The emergency card you keep for unexpected expenses. Father. All linked to the trust I set up after I left. The one I've been funding quietly for 8 years while you told the world I was broke. Michael's face drains of color. You're lying. Am I? I tap the screen. Decline, decline, decline. Each notification pings softly like a death knell. There. Done. As of this moment, every card in your wallets is worthless. Mother's hand flies to her necklace as if it might vanish next. Emily, this is insane. You can't. I can. And I just did. I look at Father, and for the first time in my life, he looks small. You taught me everything I know about cutting off dead weight. The silence is absolute. Clarissa's champagne flute trembles in her hand. Michael's phone has slipped to the tablecloth, forgotten. Somewhere across the room, a glass shatters, but no one at our table moves. I stand smoothing my dress, a simple black sheath that cost more than Mother's shoes, though she'll never know it. Dinner's on me tonight. Consider it my anniversary gift. As I walk away, heels clicking against marble, I catch the eye of the maitre d'. He gives me the slightest nod. My instructions were clear: whatever happens, keep the cameras rolling. By morning, Boston's elite will wake up to a video titled "The Night the Parkers Lost Everything at Their Own Table." What they didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this dinner for months. As I stepped out of Le Cygne Noir into the cool, Boston night, the valet handed me my keys with a knowing smile, and I slid behind the wheel of my understated black Audi, the one they always mocked as rent-a-car chic. The city lights blurred past as I drove home, my pulse still racing from the look on their faces, but beneath the triumph simmered something older, deeper. A fire that had been banked for nearly a decade. That dinner wasn't born from a sudden whim. It was the culmination of years spent rebuilding from ashes they thought they'd scattered to the wind. To understand why cutting those cards felt like justice, you have to go back to when I was still their shining star, the daughter they paraded like a trophy. I was the pride of the Parker family from the moment I could walk. Born into a world of private schools and summer houses in Nantucket, I absorbed their expectations like oxygen. Harvard was non-negotiable. Father had donated enough to the business school to ensure my acceptance letter arrived with a personal note from the dean. I graduated summa cum laude at 22, my cap tossed high, while Mother beamed for the society pages, already planning the engagement announcements that never came because I chose work over weddings. By 25, I was back in Boston, climbing the ranks at Parker & Sons faster than anyone expected, least of all my brother Michael, who coasted on charm and connections while I buried myself in spreadsheets and deal rooms. Father called me his secret weapon. Emily's got the killer instinct. He'd boast at board meetings, clapping me on the back as I closed multi-million-dollar acquisitions. I thrived on it, the late nights, poring over financials, the thrill of spotting patterns in numbers that others missed. Parker & Sons wasn't just a firm. It was a dynasty managing wealth for old money families who summered in the same circles as ours. And woven through it all was the Parker Family Foundation, our charity arm that funded orphanages and scholarships, the perfect veneer of philanthropy. Mother chaired the galas, dripping in gowns donated by designers eager for her endorsement, while I handled the back end, ensuring donations flowed where they were meant to go. It felt noble, purposeful, the one part of our world that wasn't tainted by greed. That's what I believed until the autumn of my 26th year. I'd been promoted to Vice President of Compliance, a role Father created just for me, trusting me with the firm's most sensitive audits. One rainy Tuesday, cross-referencing foundation transfers against client accounts. I noticed discrepancies, small at first, then glaring. Funds earmarked for a children's hospital in Haiti were rerouted through shell companies in the Caymans, emerging cleaned and fattened in personal accounts linked to Parker & Sons executives. My father's signature was on every approval form, disguised but unmistakable to someone who grew up forging his name on school permission slips. My stomach churned as I dug deeper, staying late in the office until the cleaning crew knew me by name. Wire transfers masked as administrative fees, donations from anonymous donors that looped back to our own offshore entities. It wasn't sloppy. It was masterful money laundering, using the charity as a funnel to hide illicit gains from shady investments. The foundation wasn't saving lives, it was shielding crimes. I printed everything, my hands shaking, and scheduled a private meeting with Father the next morning. He listened in his corner office overlooking the harbor, steepled fingers under his chin, the way he did when humoring subordinates. When I laid the folders on his desk, his expression didn't change. "Emily, sweetheart," he said calmly, "you're seeing ghosts. These are complex structures, perfectly legal." I pushed back, voice steady, despite the fear clawing my throat. "This is fraud, Dad. We have to report it, clean it up before the regulators notice." He sighed as if I were a child demanding a pony and called in his chief counsel. Within hours, I was reassigned to special projects. My access revoked, the files vanished from my drive. They silenced me with threats disguised as concern, hints about my future. Michael's jealousy. If I caused a scandal. Mother's tears over what the press would do to our name. When I threatened to go to the authorities myself, Father leaned close. "You do that, and you'll destroy everything we've built, including your place in it." It wasn't a plea. It was a warning. I was part of the machine now, complicit by blood. For weeks I wrestled with it, nights staring at the ceiling in my Back Bay apartment, weighing loyalty against right and wrong. In the end, the foundation's work haunted me, most real children in those orphanages. Real scholarships denied because money vanished into pockets. I couldn't stay. One Friday evening, I marched into Father's office with my resignation letter and a duffel of essentials. "I'm done," I told him. "Keep your empire. I'll build my own without the lies." He laughed, actually laughed. "With what you're savings, you'll come crawling back when reality bites." Mother was worse. Over tea in her sunroom, surrounded by heirloom china, she patted my hand. "Darling, the world chews up girls like you. Independent women end up alone, regretting their stubbornness. Mark my words, you'll be begging for your old room by Christmas." I left with $23,000 in my checking account, a Harvard diploma, and a heart full of fury. No safety net, no references from Parker & Sons. They blackballed me quietly in finance circles. Jobs dried up. Old friends ghosted. For months, I waitressed nights at a diner in Cambridge, crashing on a friend's couch, wondering if they'd been right. But anger is a powerful fuel. One slow shift, arranging leftover carnations from a canceled event into bouquets for tips, something clicked. Flowers didn't lie. They bloomed or they withered based on care, not connections. With my last $5,000, I rented a tiny storefront in the South End, painted the walls myself, and hung a hand-lettered sign, "Wild Bloom Combin." It started with farmers market runs at dawn, hands raw from thorns learning soil types, and seasonal availability from books checked out of the public library. Customers trickled in, brides on budgets, neighbors wanting something cheerful. I poured everything into it, designing arrangements that told stories, sourcing rare blooms that made people stop and stare. Failure wasn't an option. It was the fire that kept me going. Word spread slowly then, all at once. A local magazine featured my shop as Boston's hidden gem, and orders flooded in. I hired my first employee, expanded to events, then corporate accounts. Wild Bloom wasn't just surviving, it was thriving quietly under the radar of the society pages that still fawned over my family. And through it all, the rage simmered, refined into something sharp and patient. They thought they'd broken me, discarded me like yesterday's news. They thought I'd vanished into failure, but I was just getting started. Those first few months after hanging the Wild Bloom Company sign felt like wrestling with fate itself. The shop was a narrow brick storefront on Shawmut Avenue, barely 300 square feet, with a leaky tin ceiling and a back room that doubled as storage, and my bedroom for the first winter. I'd wake at 4, drive to the Chelsea Flower Market in a borrowed van, held together by prayers, and haul back crates of roses, ranunculus, and whatever looked vibrant enough to convince strangers that beauty could be reborn from nothing. By 7, I was trimming stems in ice-cold water that numbed my fingers, arranging buckets by color and texture the way I once aligned balance sheets. Only now the numbers were petals, and the profit was someone's smile. I did everything myself, wrapped every bouquet in brown craft paper tied with twine, because ribbon was a luxury I couldn't afford yet. Hand-wrote care cards on recycled cardstock. Scrubbed floors on my knees after closing, then stayed up until midnight updating the website I'd built on a free template. Sleep was a rumor. Doubt was a constant companion. Creditors called about the small business loan I'd taken against my last necklace, mother's graduation gift pawned without a second thought. Some nights I sat among the buckets surrounded by the heavy scent of eucalyptus, and despair wondering if they'd been right after all. But every morning I opened the door at 9 sharp because quitting would mean letting them win, and I'd already lost too much to give them that satisfaction. Customers came slowly. A young couple planning a backyard wedding. An elderly gentleman who bought tulips every Friday for his wife's grave. A nurse who needed something cheerful after long shifts. I remembered their names, their stories, the way they liked their stems cut. Word traveled in whispers. There's a girl in the South End who makes flowers feel like magic. Brides on budgets found me through Instagram posts I photographed on my cracked iPhone against the brick wall. Corporate orders trickled in, a law firm needing centerpieces, a startup launch wanting something fresh and authentic. I delivered myself navigating Boston traffic with vases wedged between seats, praying nothing tipped. The turning point arrived on a sleeting February afternoon, when a silver Bentley pulled up outside, and a woman in a camel coat stepped out, umbrella, blooming like a black dahlia. Mrs. Eleanor Caldwell, 68, widow of the Caldwell Hotel empire, legendary for her impeccable taste and bottomless Rolodex. She'd been sent by a grateful bride whose bouquet had stolen the show. She walked the shop slowly, trailing manicured fingers over delphiniums and peonies I'd splurged on, then looked at me with eyes that had seen every kind of hustle. "You have an eye," she said simply. "My director of events is retiring. The Caldwell Group needs someone who understands luxury without the pretension. Start with the Boston property. Impress me." I nearly dropped the shears. 1 hotel lobby arrangement became 5. 5 became a contract for all 23 East Coast properties. Mrs. Caldwell didn't just open doors. She kicked them down. Introductions to wedding planners who served senators' daughters. Meetings with procurement directors at chains I'd only dreamed of. Suddenly, trucks arrived before dawn, unloading refrigerated boxes of orchids from Thailand and roses from Ecuador. I hired my first full-time florist, then a second, then a designer who'd trained in Paris. We outgrew the Shawmut space in 18 months and moved to a warehouse in Seaport with climate-controlled coolers and a team of 12. Wild Bloom Co. became the name whispered in boardrooms and bridal suites alike. Our signature style untamed elegance, garden-picked chaos in crystal vases graced magazine covers and influencer feeds. Revenue climbed into 7 figures, then 8. Investors circled, but I kept ownership tight, operating through holding companies buried layers deep. No one in the society pages connected the powerhouse supplier to the disgraced Parker daughter. I attended industry galas under subtle aliases. Hair-dyed darker glasses instead of contacts, listening to my parents' friends praise this brilliant new vendor, while they gossiped about how Emily Parker had faded into obscurity with her little hobby. I let them talk. Every contract signed, every hotel lobby that stopped guests in their tracks was another brick in the fortress I was building. The girl who once wore Chanel to board meetings now wore dirt under her nails, and pride like armor. Late nights in the warehouse surrounded by mountains of blooms, I'd trace the scars on my hands from countless thorns and feel something stronger than anger certainty. They'd taught me that blood meant obligation, that success required their approval. I was proving them wrong one stem at a time. I stayed silent about my role for years, listed as creative director on the website, while the real decisions flowed through encrypted emails and private servers. The company grew roots that ran deeper than any family tree employees who started as part-timers and became managers, suppliers who extended credit because they believed in what we were building. I mentored young women the way no one had mentored me, teaching them that reinvention wasn't failure. It was power. And always in the back of my mind, I waited for the perfect moment to step into the light, not as the prodigal daughter begging forgiveness, but as the woman who'd outgrown their shadow entirely. That day came wrapped in a gold-embossed invitation to my parents' anniversary dinner. I remember the exact moment the plan crystallized. It was a Tuesday morning in late spring, the warehouse humming with the whir of coolers and the snip of shears as my team prepped for a society wedding. I was elbow-deep in hydrangeas when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Mother. I let it ring twice, wiped my hands on my apron, and answered with the bright tone I reserved for suppliers who were late. Emily, darling. She purred the way she did when she wanted something. Your father and I have decided on Le Cygne Noir for the anniversary. Intimate, exclusive, perfect for family. A pause, heavy with expectation. Michael's hosting, of course. He insisted on covering everything, such a generous boy. Just promise me you'll behave. No scenes. We wouldn't want people thinking we raised a child who can't hold her tongue. I leaned against a workbench, petals drifting around me like confetti. Behave. As if I were still the teenager caught sneaking out. Of course, Mother. I'll be the picture of decorum. She hummed, satisfied. Good. And wear something appropriate. None of those bohemian rags you've taken to. Click. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, a slow smile spreading. Le Cygne Noir. The crown jewel of the Caldwell Hotel Group's newest acquisition. The one Mrs. Caldwell had quietly transferred a controlling stake to me 2 years earlier as a thank you for turning their floral program into a profit center. Mother had no idea. None of them did. To them, it was just another trendy spot where Michael could flash his black card and play the dutiful son. Perfect. That afternoon, I called the restaurant personally, using the private line Mrs. Caldwell had given me. Ms. Parker for Monsieur Laurent. I said in flawless French, the accent I'd picked up during a summer in Provence that my parents still dismissed as wasted time. The maitre d' recognized my voice immediately. Of course, madame. How may we serve you? Reservation for 8. Parker party June 15th. Charge everything, absolutely everything to the house account. No bill at the table. And Laurent. I lowered my voice. Make sure the sommelier knows the 95 Dom Perignon is complimentary for my guests. They deserve the best. I hung up and started planning in earnest. The dress, a custom silk crepe in midnight black, deceptively simple until the light caught the hand-beaded vines climbing the back wild blooms rendered in crystal. Shoes that cost more than Michael's first car. And the pièce de résistance, a quiet instruction to the concierge to route all charges directly to the shareholder account registered under E. Bloom Holdings. By the time they realized, it would be too late. The night arrived, humid and electric. I arrived early. slipping in through the staff entrance like I owned the place, because I did in every way that mattered. Laurent greeted me with a discreet bow. "Everything is prepared, madame. The table is yours." I surveyed the private dining room walls, paneled in smoked oak, a single chandelier dripping bohemian crystal, and our table set for war. I took my seat and waited, heart-steady, years of restraint coiled like a spring. They swept in 20 minutes late, a parade of entitlement. Father in bespoke brioni. Mother glittering like a chandelier herself. Michael smirking in Tom Ford Clarissa in a dress that screamed new money trying too hard. They barely acknowledged me as they settled already mid-conversation about Michael's latest coup. Some merger that would finally put Parker & Sons on the map. The courses arrived like clockwork. Amuse-bouche of caviar on gold leaf. Chilled lobster with yuzu. Each plate more extravagant than the last, each accompanied by Michael's loud reminders that he was footing the bill. "Only the best for Mom and Dad," he kept saying, signaling the sommelier for another bottle of the Dom. Clarissa posted photos with captions about family first, tagging influencers who fawned in the comments. Father raised his glass during the Wagyu. To my son, he toasted eyes sliding over me like I was furniture. The one carrying our legacy forward. "Harvard was just the beginning for you, Michael. Imagine where you'll be at 40, Mother beamed. And Clarissa pregnant with our first grandchild, a proper Parker heir." She patted Clarissa's still flat stomach like it was already producing stock options. Michael leaned back smug. "Yeah, well, someone has to keep the lights on. Not everyone can afford to play with flowers all day." Laughter rippled around the table, sharp as broken crystal. I sipped my water. Still, always still, and let them dig. Every boast about Michael's corner office, every dig at my quaint little shop, every toast to the grandchild who would redeem the family name was another turn of the screw. Clarissa even pulled out her phone to show ultrasound photos that didn't exist yet. "We're thinking legacy names," she trilled. "Maybe Parker Jr." Dessert arrived, a towering croquembouche, spun with gold sugar accompanied by a bottle of 1945 Chateau d'Yquem that Michael insisted on opening because why not? The waiter poured, bowing obsequiously, and I caught Laurent's eye across the room. Showtime. The plates were cleared, coffee served. Father signaled for the check with the imperious flick of 2 fingers he'd perfected over decades of being obeyed. The waiter approached silver folder in hand and placed it gently in front of Michael. My brother opened it with a flourish, then froze. "Nothing to sign, sir," the waiter said smoothly. "The evening has already been charged. To Ms. Parker's account." Michael's face went the color of the Bordeaux. "There must be a mistake. I'm covering this." "No mistake." The waiter's smile was pure Parisian politeness. "Compliments of the house. And of the principal shareholder." Mother's cup rattled in its saucer. Father's eyes darted to me, suspicion dawning. Clarissa's mouth formed a perfect O. I set my napkin down and stood smoothing my dress. Then I guess dinner's on me. But someone at that table had betrayed more than just me. I stood there in the hush that followed my words. The private dining room suddenly too small for all the history crammed between us. My calm quip hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot, and I watched it curl into their lungs. Mother's diamonds seemed to dim under the chandelier. Father's jaw worked soundlessly, and Michael's triumphant smirk had vanished as completely as his appetite. Clarissa clutched her napkin like a life raft. For the first time in my life, no one was rushing to fill the silence with another barb. Father recovered first. Of course he did. He always had to have the last word, the final verdict. He placed both palms flat on the tablecloth, leaning forward until the candlelight carved deep shadows into the lines around his mouth. "You think a few parlor tricks with credit cards make you clever?" His voice was low, meant only for our table, but it carried the same courtroom thunder he used to intimidate junior associates. "You're not fooling anyone, Emily. That little stunt might buy you a moment of attention, but it changes nothing. You walked away from your name, from everything that made you somebody. You're not a real Parker. You never were." The words were crafted to wound, sharpened over years of knowing exactly where to cut. not a real Parker. It was the ultimate exile in our world, worse than poverty, worse than scandal. Parkers didn't fail. They conquered. Parkers didn't walk away. They inherited. I felt the old ache bloom behind my ribs, the little girl who used to stand on a chair to reach his desk and beg for approval. Then I felt something colder seal over it like frost on glass. I sat back down slowly, deliberately, the way I'd seen him do when closing a hostile takeover. A real Parker, I repeated, tasting the phrase. Let me tell you what I learned about real Parker's dad. Real Parkers don't need daddy's signature on their report cards to feel worthy. Real Parkers don't measure success by how many people they can make afraid. And real Parkers. I pulled my phone from my clutch again, this time opening the banking app. They all recognized the one with the platinum interface reserved for seven-figure accounts. Real Parkers don't live off money they pretend isn't theirs. I tapped the screen once, twice, 3 times. Each decline pinged through the speaker, deliberately unmuted, deliberately loud in the stunned quiet. The American Express tied to the family trust. The Visa linked to the Newport house account. The emergency MasterCard mother kept for disasters. Declined. Frozen. Gone. Father's face drained of color so fast I thought he might faint. Mother made a small, wounded sound, her hand flying to her throat where the diamonds now felt like a noose. Michael fumbled for his wallet, pulling out his own cards as if volume could fix the problem, while Clarissa stared at me with something between horror and fascination. "You have no right," Father hissed, but his voice cracked on the last word. "I have every right," I said softly. "Those accounts. The ones you've been draining for European vacations and Michael's failed hedge fund bailouts, and Clarissa's Birkin collection, I've been funding them. Quietly. For years. Out of the profits you love to mock. And now another tap final and irrevocable. They're closed." The silence that followed wasn't just absence of sound. It was a vacuum sucking the air from their lungs, from the room, from 40 years of carefully cultivated superiority. The waiter who had been hovering nearby, Jacques, a young man I'd personally promoted after he lost everything in a divorce and needed a fresh start, stood perfectly still near the service door, phone angled just so. I'd trusted him with more than a salary. I'd trusted him with this moment. His thumb moved almost imperceptibly, capturing every second in crystal clarity. Mother's eyes filled with tears that might have been real. "Emily, please. This is your father's night." "No," I said, standing again. "This is the night you all learn what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness." I looked at each of them. Father rigid with rage he couldn't unleash in public. Mother crumbling like wet paper. Michael calculating already how to spin this. Clarissa realizing the prenup she'd bragged about might not protect her from what came next. The power shift was visceral, electric. For the first time, they weren't looking down at me. They were looking up. Jacques gave the tiniest nod. Recording complete. I picked up my clutch and walked toward the door, heels clicking like a countdown. Behind me, Father's voice finally broke through, hoarse and desperate. "Emily." I didn't turn around, and that video would soon make them regret ever calling me a disgrace. I slipped into the back seat of the waiting car service, another perk of shareholder status, and watched Le Cygne Noir shrink in the rear view until the city swallowed it whole. The adrenaline that had carried me through the evening ebbed, leaving a strange hollowness where triumph should have been. Jacques texted a thumbs-up emoji and a single word uploaded. By morning, the clip would be everywhere, carefully edited to show only their faces, their words, their shock. I closed my eyes for the short ride home, but sleep felt impossible. Instead, I opened the banking app again and stared at the closed accounts, the final balances transferred to a new trust they would never touch. My phone began vibrating before I reached the warehouse loft, first a trickle, then a flood. Bank alerts, the kind that usually meant fraud or overdraft. Auxiliary account 4821B closed. Auxiliary account 7294C closed. Trust disbursement line terminated. I frowned, swiping through them in the dim glow of the screen. These weren't the cards I'd cut tonight. These were older, deeper lines I'd set up years ago as silent lifelines. I'd always told myself it was practical keeping the family homes insured, the club memberships active, the appearance of solvency intact, so no one looked too closely at Parker and Sons. But now the alerts kept coming, each one a small detonation. One in particular stopped my breath: mortgage acceleration notice, Beacon Hill primary residence. Past due. Foreclosure proceedings initiated. I pulled over the car myself, ignoring the driver's concerned glance, and logged into the private client portal I hadn't touched in months. There it was, buried in lien documents I'd never authorized my signature forged, but flawless, listed as personal guarantor on a second mortgage taken out 3 years ago. And a third. And a home equity line that had been maxed and refinanced twice. The Beacon Hill house, the Nantucket cottage, even the Aspen chalet they bragged about constantly, all underwater with my name as the backstop. I sat in the parked car for a long time, streetlights flickering across the dashboard as the pieces slotted into place. They hadn't just been spending my money. They'd been gambling with my future, leveraging my credit, my earnings, my silence. Every Wild Bloom contract that funded their lifestyle had also secured their debt. The yacht club dues I'd covered weren't generosity. They were the interest payments keeping collectors from their door. The emergency fund Michael dipped into for his failed ventures. My dividends rerouted before I ever saw them. I drove home on autopilot, the loft's industrial elevator rattling upward as I dug deeper on my laptop. Spreadsheets I hadn't opened since the early days bloomed across the screen. Automatic transfers I'd programmed to look like charitable contributions. Loan payments masked as vendor fees. Even the property taxes on the family compound routed through a Wild Bloom subsidiary. For 8 years, I'd been the invisible pillar holding up their facade, telling myself it was easier than watching everything collapse and take me with it. Easier than admitting I still cared what happened to the people who'd thrown me away. But tonight, they'd called me not a real Parker one too many times. I started with the mortgages. One click to the servicer portal authorization codes I'd memorized years ago, and I removed myself as guarantor, legal, clean, irrevocable. The bank would notify them within 72 hours. Next, the insurance policies on every property paid annually from a dedicated account. Cancelled. The country club memberships, the private jet, share the storage unit full of mother's furs, gone. I worked methodically the way I used to close acquisitions, only now I was liquidating a lifetime of obligations. By 3 in the morning, the last transfer reversed, the final auto pay deleted. I leaned back in my chair, surrounded by dying arrangements from the day's events, wilted peonies dropping petals like blood, and felt the shift deep in my bones. The power I'd given them wasn't love. It was habit. And habits could be broken. My phone lit up again, this time with actual calls. Father first, then mother, then Michael, each one rolling to voicemail as I watched the screen. I didn't need to hear their voices to know what came next. Panic, then bargaining, then rage. The banks would call by 9. The club would revoke keycards by noon. The mortgage company would send the first certified letter by week's end. They'd wake up to a world where money didn't magically appear, where their name no longer opened doors, where the daughter they'd mocked was the only thing that had kept them afloat. I poured myself a glass of wine from the bottle I'd been saving for a celebration that suddenly felt different, and toasted the dark skyline. They'd spent years teaching me what disgrace looked like from their pedestal. Now they'd learn it from the ground. If they wanted to see what disgrace looked like, I'd show them. The morning after the dinner, I woke to a city already feasting on the carcass of our family name. My phone was a war zone of notifications tags, shares, direct messages from people I hadn't spoken to since Harvard. Jacques' video trimmed to a merciless 90 seconds of their frozen faces, and my quiet devastation had exploded across every platform Boston society haunted. By 8 o'clock, it was the top story on the Globe's lifestyle page, headline screaming, "Parker Anniversary Turns Poisonous Disgrace," or Justice. I brewed coffee in the loft's kitchen, watching the view count climb into the millions, and felt nothing but the cold satisfaction of a promise kept. Mother struck first because of course she did. By noon, she'd mobilized her network of garden club matrons and charity luncheon vipers, spinning the narrative with the precision of a publicist on retainer. The story she fed them was elegant in its cruelty. Poor greedy Emily, bitter over her failed career, had orchestrated a public tantrum to extort money from her loving family. She's always been unstable. Mother reportedly sighed over mimosas at the Algonquin Club. We tried to help her, but some children mistake generosity for weakness. Screenshots of texts flew through group chats, Mother positioning herself as the tragic saint, me as the prodigal daughter turned gold digger. For 48 hours it worked. Sympathy cards arrived at the Beacon Hill house. Old friends called to commiserate about that awful video. Michael's broker buddies slapped him on the back for handling it like a man. Clarissa posted a tear-streaked selfie with the caption, "Family is everything, even when it hurts." They thought they'd contained the fire. Then the bank started talking. It began with a junior loan officer at First Republic who recognized my name from the guarantor documents and made one curious call to a reporter friend. By Wednesday, the Globe had a follow-up Parker family empire built on secret loans, guaranteed by the daughter they disowned. Public records are merciless. Once someone pulled the mortgage filings, the rest unraveled like a cheap sweater. The Nantucket cottage refinanced 4 times. The Aspen chalet leveraged to the hilt. The Beacon Hill townhouse, 6 bedrooms original crown molding, priceless address facing sheriff's sale in 90 days. And every signature page listing me as the invisible backstop. Boston's elite has a sixth sense for blood in the water. Invitations dried up overnight. The Harbor Gala Committee quietly removed Mother as co-chair creative differences. The country club suspended charging privileges pending account review. A charity auction where Father had pledged a weekend on the non-existent yacht suddenly found itself short 1 lot. Phones that once rang with flattery now went silent, or worse, buzzed with screenshots of the foreclosure notices. The media piled on. Channel 5 ran drone footage of the Beacon Hill house with a chyron from Beacon Hill to Broken Hill. The Herald dug up old photos of galas we'd hosted and juxtaposed them with the video freeze frame of Father's purple face. Bloggers who owed me favors from Wild Bloom events started dropping hints, anonymous tips about the floral heiress who'd been bankrolling the Parkers for years. By Friday, the narrative had flipped so completely that Mother's greed story looked like the desperate lie it was. I watched it unfold from the warehouse fielding calls from reporters who somehow had my private number. "No comment," I said, each time, voice sweet as honey. Let the documents speak. Let the canceled memberships and returned RSVPs do the screaming. Michael tried bravado, first posting a statement about temporary liquidity issues and family privacy. It backfired spectacularly when someone leaked his Amex decline at the yacht club bar. Clarissa deleted her socials entirely after a meme account superimposed her ultrasound photo over a foreclosure sign. Father retreated behind the gates, but drones don't respect gates. Mother made one last stand, cornering a society columnist at a lunch and bursting into theatrical tears. "My daughter has destroyed us out of spite," she reportedly sobbed. The columnist printed it, then added a footnote about the $1.2 million in personal loans I'd guaranteed that were now in default. By the end of the week, the Parkers weren't just embarrassed. They were radioactive. Board seats resigned to focus on family. Clients pulled assets from Parker & Sons, citing reputational risk. The summer invite list that once started with us now pretended we didn't exist. At the grocery store in Beacon Hill, Mother was photographed in sunglasses buying store-brand wine. The photo went viral with the caption, "How the mighty have roséed." They became the cautionary tale whispered at every cocktail party. Don't raise a child who can buy and sell you. Don't mistake silence for surrender. Don't call someone a disgrace when your entire life is built on their success. I refreshed the society pages one last time before shutting down my laptop, watching the final invitation. A black tie fundraiser Mother had chaired for 15 years announced her replacement with a 28-year-old tech heiress. The mighty Parkers reduced to a punchline. And while they scrambled for sympathy, I found something buried even deeper. The scandal had barely cooled when I decided to dig into the one place they'd always kept locked away from me, the Parker Family Foundation's archived records. With the press circling and their social calendar in tatters, no one noticed when I hired a discreet forensic accountant to access the old storage unit in Quincy, where decades of files gathered dust. I told myself it was due diligence, protecting Wild Bloom from any fallout if regulators came knocking. But deep down, I knew I was hunting for the final nail, something that would bury their lies so deep they'd never resurface. The boxes arrived at the warehouse on a rainy Thursday, 23 cartons sealed since the year I left. I worked alone after hours, the team gone home surrounded by the faint perfume of drying lavender from the day's arrangements. Dust motes danced in the overhead lights as I sliced open the first lid, pulling out ledgers yellowed with age donor lists grant approvals. At first it was mundane galas scholarships, the polished facade I'd once believed in. Then I hit the restricted files, the ones marked board eyes, only secured with tape that crumbled at my touch. Hours blurred. Coffee went cold. My back ached from hunching over the concrete floor, but I couldn't stop. The patterns emerged like bruises under skin donations from anonymous LLCs that traced back to Parker & Sons clients under investigation. Grants awarded to non-existent orphanages in countries with no oversight. Wire transfers that looped through 3 continents before landing in accounts controlled by shell corporations. The charity wasn't just a tax write-off. It was a washing machine scrubbing dirty money clean under the guise of goodwill. Every zero, every decimal screamed what I'd only glimpsed a decade ago. They hadn't reformed after I left, they'd perfected the system. I was photographing pages for the accountant when a slim folder slipped from the bottom of a box, unmarked, except for a faded date 1992. Inside were medical records, a birth certificate, and a paternity test sealed in plastic. My hands went numb. The child's name was Lisa Marie Caldwell. No scratched out and rewritten as Lisa Marie Thompson. Mother's maiden name. Born 6 months before Michael in a private clinic in Switzerland. The father listed Richard Ellison Parker. My father. The room tilted. I sat hard among the scattered papers, staring at the tiny footprint inked on the certificate. An affair during one of father's business trips to Europe, hidden with payoffs and NDAs. The mother, a junior analyst who vanished from the firm shortly after, had died in a car accident when Lisa was 5. Orphaned, she'd been quietly enrolled in one of the foundation's scholarship programs, the very ones I'd overseen during my compliance years. I remembered her now, a quiet girl with father's eyes, top of her class, always volunteering extra hours at the fund's office. I'd personally approved her college tuition, mentored her on internship applications, even helped her land a junior position at the foundation after graduation. Lisa, the dedicated employee who sent thank you notes every year. Lisa, who shared my blood and never knew, or did she? I found the answer in a hidden compartment of the folder, a flash drive wrapped in plastic labeled only with my initials. My heart hammered as I plugged it into my laptop. Password protected, but the code was my birthday, the one father always forgot. Files cascaded open, scanned documents mirroring what I'd found tonight, plus emails dating back 8 years. Lisa had discovered the laundering scheme months before I did, piecing it together from the orphanage audits. Instead of reporting it, she'd copied everything, then systematically altered digital trails to remove any trace of my involvement. My signatures on approvals, my emails in chains, my name on distribution lists. One file was a letter addressed to me but never sent. Emily. It began. If you're reading this, you already know too much. I've been watching from the shadows since I was old enough to understand what half-sister meant. Dad doesn't know I exist on paper. Mom made sure of that before she died. When I saw what they were doing with the fund, the kids who never got the help, the money that disappeared, I couldn't let you take the fall. You were the only one trying to do right. I erased you from the evidence. Burned the hard copies. If they ever come for you, use this. You deserve the truth more than revenge. Tears blurred the screen. All those years I'd thought I was alone fighting ghosts in the dark. Lisa had been there, a silent guardian, risking everything to shield a sister she'd never met properly. The foundation that had given me purpose, that I'd fled to save my soul, had been rotten from the start. And the one person who could have destroyed me had chosen protection instead. I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet, surrounded by the ghosts of secrets. The sister I never knew I had. The charity that fed on innocence. The father who built an empire on lies so deep even his blood couldn't escape them. The foundation that built my life was also the one that laundered theirs. I clutched the flash drive like a live wire as I drove through the pre-dawn streets to Beacon Hill. The city still asleep while my world cracked open. The evidence on it wasn't just proof of laundering. It was a death sentence for everything Father had built. I couldn't wait for lawyers or leaks. This demanded a reckoning face-to-face, raw, and unfiltered. By the time I parked outside the townhouse, the sky had turned that bruised gray that precedes sunrise, and I used the key I'd never returned, slipping inside like a ghost returning to haunt. The house smelled the same lemon polish and old money, but felt hollow echoes where laughter used to be. I found Father in his study, the one room he'd barricaded himself in since the scandal broke. He was at the desk in his robe, surrounded by shredded documents and a half-empty decanter of Scotch eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. He looked up when I entered, surprise flickering before the mask slammed down. "Get out!" he growled, voice gravel. "Haven't you done enough?" I closed the door softly and leaned against it. "Not nearly. We need to talk about the foundation, Dad. All of it." He laughed bitter and sharp. "The foundation that's ancient history. Whatever you're imagining." "I'm not imagining." I pulled out my laptop, set it on the desk, and opened the files from the drive. Pages scrolled wire transfers, fake grants, the offshore accounts. "This is what you built while preaching legacy. This is what you silenced me for." His face hardened as he scanned the screen, but denial came swift. "Fabrications. Someone's setting me up, probably that weasel accountant you hired. Or your brother's enemies on the board. I would never save it." I slid the fraternity folder across the desk. "Lisa Thompson. Ring any bells, Switzerland, 1992. You paid her mother to disappear, then funneled her through the very system you were abusing." The color drained from his cheeks. For the first time, the great Richard Parker looked small. That was a mistake. A youthful indiscretion. It has nothing to do with everything I cut in. You used the charity to hide everything. And when I got too close, you threw me out like trash. He stood abruptly, sweeping papers to the floor. "You have no idea the pressure I was under, clients demanding returns, regulators circling this city eats the weak. I did what I had to for the family." Footsteps thundered down the hall. Michael's shirt, untucked hair wild, bursting in like he owned the confrontation. "What the hell is she doing here?" He spotted the laptop and lunged for it. "That's mine, you stole it." I stepped back as he grabbed a stack of printouts, heading for the fireplace where embers still glowed from last night's fire. "Burn it all," Father barked. "Every copy." Michael fed pages into the flames, the orange light dancing on his panicked face. "This is harassment, Emily. We'll sue you for everything." I held up my phone, red record light glowing. "Go ahead. Say it louder for the federal investigators." They froze. Michael's hand hovered over the fire paper, curling black at the edges. Father's eyes darted to the phone, realization dawning. "You recorded this," he whispered. "Every word." I kept my voice level. Denials, blame-shifting evidence, tampering. All time-stamped. Michael dropped the papers, ash scattering across the Persian rug. "You bitch." "Careful," I said. "That's assault on a recording." Father sank into his chair, suddenly old. "What do you want? Money, the house, name it, and it's yours. Just make this go away." "I want you to feel what I felt," I replied. "But that's not up to me anymore." I emailed the files from my phone first to my forensic accountant and securities lawyer, then to a journalist contact at the Globe with a misdirected CC list that included every major outlet in Boston. Subject line: Parker Family Foundation, full disclosure. Attachments, everything. By the time I reached the front door, sirens were already wailing in the distance. White-collar task force tipped off anonymously hours earlier, but now armed with fresh evidence. Michael tried to block me, face twisted in rage. "You think this ends us? We'll fight. You'll what?" I asked softly. "The company's frozen. Accounts seized. It's over." Father's voice cracked from the study. "Emily, please. I'm your father." I paused on the threshold, the morning light spilling in. "No. You're the man who taught me blood means nothing when power's at stake." Police cruisers pulled up as I walked down the steps, officers spilling out with warrants. Reporters weren't far behind, cameras flashing. I slipped into my car and drove away before they could corner me. The news broke by noon. Parker and Sons assets frozen pending federal investigation into money laundering and fraud. Board dissolved. Trading halted. The empire built on decades of deception crumbled in hours. But my father wasn't going down alone. He was dragging me with him. I drove away from Beacon Hill with the sirens fading in my rear view, convinced the worst was over. The warrants were served, the freeze was in place, and for one brief morning I allowed myself to breathe. Wild Bloom's orders were pouring in sympathy bouquets, curiosity, purchases, brands wanting to align with the woman who toppled an empire. I fielded congratulatory texts from suppliers and quiet calls from board members who'd always suspected but never spoken. Victory tasted clean like rain-washed air after a storm. Then Father played his last card. It started with a press conference on the courthouse steps, him in a somber suit, flanked by lawyers who'd billed millions over the years. Cameras flashed as he faced the microphone's voice trembling with practiced grief. "My daughter Emily has orchestrated this tragedy," he declared. "She was the architect of the foundation's irregularities, young, ambitious, desperate to prove herself. When I discovered her misconduct, she turned on the family to cover her tracks. I'm heartbroken, but I cannot let innocence be punished for her ambition." The lie landed like a bomb. Within hours, headlines screamed, "Prodigal daughter" or "Mastermind, Emily Parker accused of running family laundering scheme." Forged emails surfaced my signature on approvals I'd never seen, timestamps placing me in meetings that happened after I'd left. Michael fed the narrative on cable news, tearful about sisterly betrayal. Mother released a statement through her publicist. "We tried to protect her, but some darkness can't be hidden." The backlash was immediate and brutal. Hotel chains that had courted Wild Bloom for years suddenly went silent. The Waldorf account paused, pending review. A national bridal magazine pulled my feature spread. Vendors whispered about payment delays. Clients canceled events citing optics. My inbox filled with hate accusations of fraud, threats to boycott, strangers dissecting every childhood photo ever published. Stock in the Caldwell Group dipped, dragging my silent partnership with it. Reporters camped outside the warehouse shouting questions about offshore accounts in my name. I barricaded myself in the loft, watching my empire teeter on the edge of the abyss I'd created for them. One wrong move and I'd lose everything I'd built from nothing. Lawyers warned that prosecutorial discretion could swing either way. Blood ties made me an easy scapegoat. For the first time since the dinner, fear tasted metallic on my tongue. Then my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Emily, it's Lisa." Her voice was steady, familiar in a way that punched the air from my lungs. We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe in Cambridge, away from prying eyes. She arrived in a simple coat, hair pulled back, those eyes, father's eyes, meeting mine without flinching. We ordered coffee, neither of us drank. "I saw the press conference," she said quietly. "He's desperate, but he made a mistake." She slid a thick envelope across the table. Inside, original documents, unredacted emails, server logs I'd never accessed. "I've been collecting since I altered the trails. When they started pointing at you, I knew it was time." Lisa went public that afternoon, holding her own press conference outside the foundation's old offices. Microphones thrust forward as she laid it out. Her parentage, the hidden scholarship, the years watching corruption from the inside. "Emily Parker discovered the scheme and tried to stop it," she stated clearly. "She was forced out for being ethical. Everything they're accusing her of, I have proof she never touched." The shift was seismic. Networks replayed her statement on loop. Hashtags flipped from Parker fraud to Sister Truth. But the real twist came when Lisa revealed the final pieces, father's personal debt trail hidden in separate ledgers. Millions siphoned not just through charity washes, but direct from client trusts. Debts he'd collateralized against my credit, without my knowledge, forging guarantees that predated my exit. The evidence he'd planted against me, sloppy recreations that crumbled under Lisa's originals. Prosecutors pounced. The fake emails were exposed as alterations from Michael's laptop IP addresses traced metadata screaming fabrication. Father's personal debts, once buried, became the centerpiece lavish spending masked as business expenses, all propped up by loans in my name that I'd unknowingly guaranteed through old powers of attorney he'd never revoked. By nightfall, the narrative had inverted completely. Father went from victim to villain, his accusations boomeranging with devastating precision. Arrest warrants expanded. Parker & Son's remaining assets were clawed back. The man who'd tried to bury me had handed investigators the rope. Lisa texted as I watched the news. "We're in this together now." I stared at the screen, tears falling for the first time in years. Not from pain, but from the sudden, overwhelming realization that the war I'd fought alone had an ally I'd never known I had. For the first time, I wasn't fighting alone. The weight of Lisa's alliance settled over me like a warm blanket on a winter night, softening the sharp edges of the battle I'd waged for so long. For the first time in years, I slept without dreams of falling empires or accusing eyes. The next morning brought a text from an unfamiliar number, Beacon Hill. "Come alone. Please." Mom, no emojis, no explanations, just the address of the house that had once been home and was now a crime scene taped off by federal agents. I stared at the message for an hour, thumb hovering before replying with a single word. When she named 3 o'clock, the hour she used to serve tea in the sunroom when life was all pretense and no substance. I arrived early, parking down the block to avoid the lingering reporters who still haunted the steps like vultures. The side entrance was unlocked, the one the staff had used before staff became a luxury they could no longer afford. The house felt different, dust on the mantels, mail piled high, the air thick with the scent of wilting flowers from arrangements no one had thought to replace. Mother waited in the sunroom, seated in her favorite chintz armchair that faced the garden she'd once ruled like a queen. She looked smaller than I remembered, wrapped in a cashmere throw, despite the mild afternoon, her skin translucent against the fading light. The diamonds were gone, replaced by a simple gold band she'd worn beneath them all these years. An oxygen tank hummed quietly beside her, clear tubes snaking to her nose. "Sit," she said, voice raspy but steady. "Before you say anything, I know what you're thinking. That I deserve this. All of it." I remained standing, arms crossed. "You taught me never to apologize for winning." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "I taught you many things I regret." She gestured to the envelope on the table between us, thick cream stock like the anniversary invitation that started everything. "Open it." I did slowly. Inside were medical records, stage 4 lung cancer diagnosis 6 months ago, prognosis weeks. And beneath them a confession drafted in her elegant script, notarized and ready for prosecutors. "I knew about the affair," she said quietly. "Switzerland, 1992. Your father came home reeking of guilt and cheap perfume. The girl was born and I chose the life we had. The name, the invitations, the perfect family that never was." Her eyes met mine, wet but unflinching. "I buried it, paid the mother to disappear, enrolled the child in our programs to keep her close enough to watch, far enough to forget. When you found the laundering, I let him push you out. Better one daughter lost than everything." The words landed heavy but not surprising. I'd suspected pieces. "Why tell me now?" "Because they're coming for you next." She tapped the confession. "Residual liability. Complicity by association. Your father will throw anyone under the bus to save himself, and prosecutors love a Parker scalp. This admits I knew everything: the affair, the money, the cover-ups. I was the silent partner. Take it to your lawyers. It'll shield you completely." I stared at the pages, her signature trembling but clear. "You'd go to prison. If I last that long." She coughed deep and rattling, then straightened. "I spent a lifetime protecting appearances. Let me protect my daughter for once." The room blurred. All the years of barbs, the cold dismissals, the way she'd looked through me at that dinner they cracked open to reveal something raw underneath. Why? I whispered. After everything. She reached into the drawer and pulled out a second envelope, older edges worn. Because I wasn't always this woman. Before the marriage, before the money, I wanted to be a gardener. Real dirt under my nails, not just presiding over benefit auctions. Your father promised me the world, and I let him prune me into something else. Inside was a bank statement from a trust established the month I left clean money diverted from her personal inheritance before the laundering tainted everything. Quarterly deposits, modest but consistent, routed through anonymous channels. I set it up the day you walked out, she said. Called it the Wild Bloom Fund. Thought if you ever needed a lifeline, it'd be there without his fingerprints. Didn't know you'd actually use it to start your company. The lawyers hid the source even from you. I traced the numbers, heart pounding. The initial deposit matched exactly what I thought was a small business grant from a silent investor. Every lean year when suppliers threatened to cut me off, mysterious payments had kept the lights on. Mrs. Caldwell's favor had been the introduction. Mother's money had been the seed. You funded me. I breathed. All this time. A mother's penance, she said softly. Too late, too little. But yours. I knelt beside her chair, the envelope trembling in my hands. The woman who'd taught me that love was a transaction had given without expectation, without credit. The Ice Queen had melted into someone human, fragile, real. She touched my cheek with fingers cold as marble. Forgive me if you can. Hate me if you must. But live free, Emily. Bloom wild. She slipped away 2 weeks later, quietly in her sleep, the confession delivered to prosecutors the day before. Charges against me evaporated. The trust transferred fully, no strings. I lost the woman I hated and found the mother I'd always wanted. The funeral was small, held in the chapel Mother had chaired fundraisers for, but never truly believed in a handful of remaining loyalists, murmuring condolences that felt more like damage control than grief. I stood at the bayou with Lisa, our black dresses identical in cut, but worlds apart in meaning, watching the casket lower without fanfare. Father's absence was conspicuous. He'd been denied furlough for the service, shackled instead to a holding cell downtown, while prosecutors built their cathedral of charges. The empire he'd lorded over was gone. Parker and Sons dissolved by court order, client files scattered to receivers, the brass nameplate pried from the building lobby and sold at auction for pennies on the dollar. Assets followed swiftly. The Beacon Hill house seized for restitution, contents cataloged and tagged, Mother's antiques, Father's humidor collection, Michael's wine cellar that had once impressed investors. The Nantucket cottage padlocked by Marshall's, the Aspen chalet already under contract to a tech billionaire who'd lowballed because scandal depreciates square footage. Bank accounts drained into victim compensation funds, the yacht repossessed at the dock, with reporters filming from helicopters. Every symbol of their supremacy stripped away, leaving only the man himself. He was arrested 3 days later, pulled from the federal detention center in handcuffs that caught the winter sun like cheap jewelry. Cameras followed as they walked him to the transport van, his once tailored suit hanging loose on a frame that had shrunk without the armor of wealth. Indictments read like a greatest hits of white-collar crime wire, fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy. Bail denied, flight risk, the judge said, citing the private jet he'd tried to flee on before marshals grounded it. The request for a meeting came through my lawyer the following week, routed through the public defender who'd taken his case after the high-priced firm jumped ship. Mr. Parker wishes to speak with his daughter, the message read. One time, no cameras, no recordings. I stared at the email for a long hour. Lisa's steady presence beside me, the only thing keeping me from deleting it unread. You don't owe him this, she said quietly. But I did. Not for him, for the closure Mother had gifted me in her final act. The visiting room at the correctional facility smelled of bleach and despair, divided by scratched plexiglass that forced us to speak through phones older than my business. Father shuffled in wearing an orange jumpsuit that made him look like a stranger, hair gone fully white overnight. The arrogance leached from his posture. He picked up the receiver with hands that trembled slightly. Emily. His voice cracked on my name. You came. I sat straight, expression neutral. Say what you need to say. He glanced at the guard, then back at me, eyes wet. I was wrong. About everything. The business, the choices, the way I treated you. You built something real, honest work, real people who depend on you. I built smoke, mirrors, lies that caught up faster than I could run. The admission hung between us, stripped of the bluster that once filled boardrooms. No excuses about pressure or competition or how the game is played. Just a broken man confronting the wreckage. I thought power was never having to say you're sorry, he continued, voice barely above a whisper. Turns out it's the opposite. I'm sorry, Emily, for pushing you out, for choosing the wrong things, for being the father you deserved only in my failures. I studied his face, searching for the manipulation that had always lurked beneath apologies in the past. But there was none, only exhaustion and something that might have been regret if he'd ever learned how to feel it properly. You taught me what not to become, I said coolly, the words measured and without heat. You built an empire of lies. I built mine with truth. He nodded slowly, accepting the blade without flinching. Fair enough. I just needed you to hear it from me. Before sentencing, before whatever comes next. We sat in silence after that, the phone heavy between us, years of damage too vast for one conversation to bridge. When the guard signaled time, Father pressed his palm to the glass. I didn't mirror the gesture. As I stood to leave, he spoke one last time. Your mother would be proud. The woman you became, despite us. I walked out without looking back, the heavy doors clanging shut behind me like periods at the end of a very long sentence. The legal machinery ground forward, plea deals, rejected trial dates set the full weight of federal prosecution bearing down. Father's fall was complete, absolute, the kind of spectacular collapse that would be studied in business schools as a cautionary tale. But one person wasn't done destroying what was left of me, my brother. Michael had always been the golden boy, the one who skated through life on charm, and Father's blind favoritism leaving the heavy lifting to everyone else. With Father behind bars and the family name toxic, I assumed he'd slink away to lick his wounds. Perhaps a quiet divorce from Clarissa, a low-profile job through old fraternity brothers, anything to avoid the spotlight. Instead, he went underground, scheming in the shadows like a rat tunneling through collapsing walls. I didn't see it coming until Lisa called me late one night, her voice tight with urgency. He's moving assets, she said without preamble. I still have backdoor access to some of the old Foundation servers' habit from cleaning up messes. Michael's been routing what's left of Father's offshore slush funds through dummy corporations. Cayman transfers crypto wallets, even some art purchases in Clarissa's maiden name. He's trying to hide it all before probate, then pin the discrepancies on you, claim you siphoned inheritance as revenge. I sat up in bed, the loft dark except for the glow of my phone. Proof. Enough to bury him, but not enough to stop him clean. He's framing it as your forgery, old emails, doctored signatures. If he pulls this off, you'll be fighting civil suits for years while he walks away with millions. Rage simmered, but I kept it iced. Michael wasn't just surviving. He was weaponizing the last scraps to stab me one final time. We end this, I told Lisa. Quietly. We met at dawn in a nondescript coffee shop in Dorchester. Laptops, open burners ready. Lisa laid out the transfers, 7 figures scattered across accounts Father had kept hidden even from prosecutors. Michael's plan was clever, trigger inheritance disputes by accusing me of undue influence over Mother's trust, then discover missing funds tied to my old access codes. Lawsuits would drag, freezing everything while he liquidated and vanished. We bait him, I said. Make him think there's one last pot, something big he can't resist. Lisa nodded, already typing. She created a phantom escrow account linked to a supposed forgotten Parker holding in Liechtenstein, real enough to pass a cursory check, seeded with forged statements showing 8 figures earmarked for family reconciliation distribution. We routed the alert through Father's old lawyer, the one still on retainer and desperate for billables. The message, urgent mediation, required funds release imminent upon signed agreement. Michael bit within hours. His reply came frantic, schedule the call. I'll sign whatever. We set it for that evening video off my number spoofed to appear as the lawyer's office. Lisa handled the tech call recording screen capture, blockchain tracing on the real transfers he was making in parallel. He answered on the first ring, voice oily with false confidence. Finally some sense. Emily there. Just me, I said calmly. Terms are simple. You acknowledge the Liechtenstein holding as legitimate inheritance, waive all claims against me, and sign the release. Funds disperse immediately. He hesitated, suspicion creeping in. Why so generous? What's the catch? No catch. Clean break. You get your share, I get peace. Greed won. I heard him shuffling papers, Clarissa murmuring in the background about enough for a fresh start in Miami. Lisa nodded across the table. His real transfers were accelerating, draining the last hidden accounts as he spoke. Send the docs, he demanded. I emailed the file, a beautifully crafted quitclaim that looked standard at first glance, waiving his rights to disputed assets, acknowledging my sole beneficial interest in the Liechtenstein fund. Buried in the legalese, routed through layers, Lisa had embedded irrevocable transfer of all linked holdings to a Wild Bloom charitable trust effective upon digital signature, and a confession clause triggered by acceptance admission that any prior claims against me were fabricated. He signed without reading, past the dollar signs, the e-signature ping echoing like a gavel. Done. Wire the money. Already processed, I said sweetly. Check your accounts. Silence, then panic as he logged in. Zeros across the board. The real transfers he'd initiated. Reversed mid-flight, bounced back to the escrow we'd controlled all along, then redirected to federal restitution before he could blink. What did you do? He roared. You signed it away. Lisa cut in, her voice now on the line. Every dime. To charity. In exchange for admitting on record that your framing attempt was fraud. The call devolved into screams, threats, pleas. Clarissa wailing about alimony. We let it run, capturing every damning word, then hung up and forwarded the package recording documents, transfer logs. Not to police civil court was cleaner. By morning, Michael's last lifeline was severed without a single lawsuit against me. He lost everything to his own avarice, no judge required. Prosecutors tacked on new charges for him, tampering, obstruction. Clarissa filed for divorce by noon. Michael vanished into a cheap motel, the golden boy reduced to nothing. Lisa and I toasted with coffee as the news broke, another Parker in freefall. But victory felt hollow because I finally understood what winning cost. The hollow echo of Michael's defeat lingered in the warehouse like the scent of crushed stems, after a long day, satisfying at first, then fading into something quieter, more poignant. I wandered the rows of coolers that night, fingers trailing over buckets of ranunculus and sweet peas, the blooms I'd nurtured from seeds while my family withered. Victory had come complete and unforgiving, but it left me unmoored, wandering through the life I'd built, wondering what came after the war. The reporters had moved on to fresher scandals. Wild Bloom's orders stabilized at record highs, and Lisa had become a fixture in my days. Coffee runs, strategy sessions, the slow weaving of sisterhood from threads we'd never known existed. Yet something felt unfinished, a loose thread tugging at the edges of my peace. It arrived on a Tuesday, unassuming amid the usual stack of invoices and thank you notes from brides. A cream envelope, mother's stationery, postmarked the day before she died. My lawyer had held it back, waiting for the legal dust to settle. I carried it to the loft's window overlooking the harbor, the city lights shimmering like scattered diamonds on black velvet, and slid it open with a stem cutter still flecked with sap. Inside was a single sheet of her heavy vellum folded around a photograph I'd forgotten existed, me at 7, gap-toothed and fierce, standing in the Beacon Hill garden with dirt-streaked knees and a fistful of dandelions. Mother's handwriting flowed across the page in the elegant script she'd used for invitation addresses and society correspondence. My wildflower, never let them prune you. The words stopped my breath. She'd called me that once in a rare moment of softness when I was small before the galas, and expectations hardened her into the woman I'd learned to armor against. I sank onto the window seat, the photo trembling in my hand as I read on. Emily, my dearest girl, if you're reading this, I've gone ahead without the grace I always pretended to have. The doctors say weeks, but we both know I've been dying since the day I chose silence over truth. I watched you grow wild in a garden that only valued manicured roses, and I let them clip your wings because I was too afraid to fly myself. Before your father, before the name and the money, I was Eleanor Thompson of Worcester scholarship girl, botany major, dreaming of greenhouses in the Berkshires where I'd hybridize roses that bloomed in winter. I wanted dirt under my nails and the freedom to fail without disappointing anyone. But Richard Parker swept in with his promises of security, and I traded my dreams for diamond clips and dinner invitations. Fear made me cruel, darling. Fear of being ordinary, of being left behind, of admitting I'd chosen wrong. When you discovered the foundation's rot, I should have stood with you. Instead, I helped push you out, terrified of losing the fragile world I'd built on lies. Every barb, every dismissal, it was the sound of my own chains rattling. I convinced myself protecting the family meant protecting the facade, never seeing how I was pruning the only part of us that was real. The trust I set up wasn't charity. It was confession. Every deposit a silent apology, every bloom you grew from it a reminder that something beautiful could come from my cowardice. You broke free where I never dared, built something honest where I settled for hollow. You've ended the cycle we started, generations of Parkers choosing power over people, appearance over authenticity. Because of you, Lisa will never know the weight of those expectations. Because of you, I die knowing at least one of us lived wild and free. Burn this if you must. Hate me if it helps. But know this, in the end, the woman who taught you to hide your thorns was only trying to protect her own wounds. You, my wildflower, learned to bloom through concrete. I'm proud, so achingly proud of the garden you grew without us. All my love always. Mom, tears fell onto the page, blurring the ink where she'd signed her old name, Eleanor Thompson, not Parker. I pressed the letter to my chest, the photo crumpling slightly in my fist. All those years I'd seen her as the enemy, the ice queen who valued reputation over daughter, when she'd been a prisoner, too trapped by choices she'd made at 22, the same age I'd been when I walked away. Her cruelty hadn't been strength. It had been survival, warped and twisted until it looked like malice. I thought of the girl in the photo, fierce and unpruned, and realized I'd become her again. Not despite my family, but because I'd finally cut away the dead wood. The toxic cycle, the lies, the greed, the conditional love ended with me. No more children raised to perform perfection. No more dreams sacrificed for dinner party seating charts. Lisa would build her life without those shadows, and any children we might have would know love that didn't come with price tags. I placed the letter and photo in the small fire safe with Mother's trust documents, the ones that had seeded Wild Bloom without fanfare. The weight I'd carried since that first discovery in the Foundation files lifted not all at once, but in a slow, unfurling like petals opening to morning sun. Healing wasn't the absence of pain. It was choosing to grow around it. But before I could move on, I had one last dinner to attend. The dinner invitation came from an unexpected source. A handwritten note slipped under the warehouse door. Father's prison scrawl on contraband stationery. One visit, it read. No lawyers, just us. Please. I folded it into my pocket and let it sit there for days, the paper softening against my thigh like a bruise I wasn't ready to press. Mother's letter had cracked something open in me, a willingness to see the humans behind the monsters. But Father was the deepest wound, the architect of every doubt I'd ever carried about my worth. Lisa urged caution, reminding me that forgiveness wasn't obligation, but the pull was magnetic. If I was truly breaking cycles, I couldn't leave this one chained. The Federal Correctional Institution sat squat and gray against a highway skyline razor wire glinting under a weak November sun. I signed in under fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry bees, surrendered my belongings and walked the gauntlet of metal detectors and echoing corridors until a guard led me to the visiting room. No plexiglass this time. Contact visits for good behavior, though the table was bolted to the floor and cameras watched from every corner. Father entered, shuffling ankles, chained the orange jumpsuit, swallowing a frame that had once commanded boardrooms. His hair was thin to wisps, face mapped with new lines etched by humiliation and poor nutrition. The man who'd loomed like a titan in my childhood now looked like any other defeated elder eyes darting before settling on me with something between hope and shame. "Emily?" He sat heavily, chains clinking. "You look strong." I took the opposite chair, folding my hands to hide their tremor. "They said you wanted to talk." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I rehearsed this 1,000 times. Apologies feel cheap now, too late, too small. But I need to say it anyway." His voice was rough, stripped of the polished cadence that once closed deals. "I was wrong about everything. The business, the choices, how I raised you kids. You were always the best of us, the one with real integrity, real guts. I see that now. Wild bloom. What you've built without shortcuts, without hurting anyone. It's extraordinary. I'm proud, Emily. Genuinely proud." The praise landed strangely untainted by the old manipulation. No qualifiers, no comparisons to Michael. Just raw acknowledgement from a man who'd lost the power to gain anything from flattery. "I've had time to think," he continued, staring at his cuffed hands. "Real time, no distractions. You tried to save us back then, save the company, save those kids the foundation was supposed to help. I punished you for being better than me. That's the truth. I was threatened by your honesty because it exposed mine as counterfeit." I listened without interrupting, letting the words settle. The room smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee, but beneath it ran the faint metallic tang of regret. He wasn't asking for absolution. He was offering testimony. "I've lost everything," he said quietly. "The name, the money, the illusion of control. But watching you rise from what I did, it's the only thing that makes these walls bearable. You've got what I never had: integrity that doesn't bend." The guard shifted, a subtle warning that time was thinning. I leaned forward, meeting his eyes for the first time without armor. "I came here carrying hate like a second skin. It kept me warm when I had nothing else. But I've learned something, Dad. Holding on to it doesn't punish you, it prisons me." He stilled, breath catching. "I'm letting it go," I said, voice steady. "Not because you deserve it, but because I do. You taught me what not to become, and I thank you." The words hung between us, simple and profound. His eyes filled, a single tear escaping down the creased cheek. "That's more than I have any right to." We sat in silence after that, the kind that doesn't need filling. When the guard tapped his watch, Father reached across the table slowly so the chains wouldn't rattle, and covered my hand with his. The skin was paper-thin, veins prominent, but the grip was gentle. "Live well, Emily," he whispered. "That's my sentence now." I squeezed once, then stood. "Goodbye, Dad." Walking out felt different from every other departure. No slammed doors, no burning bridges. Just a quiet uncoupling, the last chain falling away. One last supper, one last goodbye. The phrase echoed through the weeks that followed, a quiet mantra, as winter settled over Boston like a soft blanket. One last supper, one last goodbye. I had laid the past to rest in that prison visiting room, but something in me knew closure wasn't solitary. It needed witnesses, a table where old wounds could breathe their last. Le Scene Noir had come up for sale in the aftermath of the scandals, the Caldwell Group eager to distance itself from any Parker association. I bought it anonymously through a Wild Bloom subsidiary renamed Nothing Changed. Little kept the smoked oak panels, the bohemian crystal chandelier. The ghosts that lingered in the private dining room where everything had shattered. It felt right to reclaim the place where the chains first snapped, turn it from battlefield to hearth. I sent the invitations on simple cream cardstock. No gold embossing this time, just black ink and my handwriting. Lisa first, then a handful of distant cousins who'd reached out after Mother's funeral with genuine warmth instead of obligation. Michael's address came from his public defender. Father's from the prison liaison, a single line allowing one representative. No RSVPs required, no explanations offered. Just a date, a time, and the address they all knew too well. The night arrived crystalline cold. The harbor iced at the edges, city lights reflecting like scattered stars on black glass. I arrived early, walking the restaurant in darkness before the staff lit the candles. Laurent, now general manager and minority partner, greeted me with the same discreet bow he'd given the night everything ignited. "The table is ready, madame." 8 places, white linens, crisp centerpieces of white ranunculus and eucalyptus, wild yet restrained, blooming in winter, because I'd forced them in the greenhouse for this exact purpose. They trickled in slowly, awkwardly, the way people enter a room where history weighs heavier than the air. Lisa, first radiant in emerald silk that brought out the eyes we'd both inherited, her hug fierce and wordless. The cousins next. Second cousins from mother's side I'd met only at weddings, offering tentative smiles and bottles of wine they'd brought like peace offerings. Michael slunk in last from the family side, thinner eyes darting suit off the rack instead of Savile Row, Clarissa conspicuously absent. Father's representative arrived precisely on time, Mr. Harlan, the old family attorney who'd survived the purge by cooperating early, carrying a sealed envelope and wearing the expression of a man attending his own wake. We took our seats in silence, the chandelier dimmed to candle glow the same table where Father had once declared me unworthy. No toasts, no small talk. The staff served, course by course, oysters, consommé, duck confit dishes, chosen for comfort rather than ostentation. Silverware clinked softly. Wine poured and sipped, eyes meeting across the linen, then sliding away. Michael stared at his plate as if it might bite. The cousins glanced between Lisa and me, piecing together resemblances they'd never noticed. Harlan sat ramrod-straight envelope untouched beside his bread plate. Halfway through the main course, I stood. The room stilled. "I didn't bring you here to rehash," I said quietly. "Or to gloat. This table saw the worst of us. Tonight it sees something else." I nodded to Laurent, who dimmed the lights further and unveiled the far wall where a temporary curtain had hung all evening. Beneath it, enlarged and framed in simple oak, a photograph I'd found in Mother's secret drawer, one she'd kept hidden even from herself. Mother at 35, laughing in the Beacon Hill garden. One arm around 7-year-old me, with my fistful of dandelions, the other around a toddler on her hip. Lisa, chubby-cheeked and beaming, the secret summer before everything fractured. Gasps rippled. Lisa's hand flew to her mouth. Michael's fork clattered. Harlan's eyes widened behind bifocals. The cousins leaned forward, recognition dawning. There we were, 3 generations of Parker women connected before lies tore us apart, blooming together in sunlight none of us remembered. "I found this after she passed," I continued, voice steady. "Proof we were family long before we were enemies." I turned to Lisa, whose eyes shimmered in the candlelight. "I've spent years building Wild Bloom alone, but it was never meant to be solitary. Lisa, I want you as partner, co-owner, equal share. Not charity, not obligation, because blood and choice both matter and you've earned both." She rose, slowly crossing to me, and we embraced in the hush, her tears wetting my shoulder. The cousins applauded softly, genuine warmth breaking the ice. Even Harlan managed a nod of approval. Michael stared at the photo, something unreadable flickering across his face. Regret, perhaps, or the ghost of what might have been. Dessert arrived, simple pear tart, no towering croquembouche this time. When the plates cleared, Laurent presented the leather folder. I opened it, signed with a flourish, and slid it back. "This time," I said to the table loud enough for all to hear, "dinner's on me to end it, not prove anything." No one spoke as we rose to leave, coats collected in quiet ceremony. Michael lingered last, Harlan hovering. "Emily," he started, voice rough. I waited. He swallowed whatever plea or barb he'd prepared and simply nodded, a gesture so small it carried oceans. Harlan handed me the envelope, Father's handwriting on the front, for Emily. I tucked it away, unopened. Some goodbyes were private. Outside, snow had begun to fall, soft and forgiving, blanketing the city in hush. Lisa linked arms with me as we watched the others disperse into the night, cousins exchanging numbers, promising real visits. Michael disappearing into a rideshare without looking back. Harlan tipping his hat before vanishing into the flakes. We stood there long after the street emptied sisters under streetlights that turned the snow to gold. Revenge broke the chains. Love rebuilt the family. And there we were, standing in the soft snowfall outside Le Cygne Noir. Lisa's arm linked through mine as the city hushed around us. The dinner had ended not with fireworks or final accusations, but with the quiet turning of a page, a family reshaped, not perfect but real. Revenge had been the hammer that shattered the old chains, the ones forged from lies and expectations that bound us all. But love, unexpected and hard-won, had picked up the pieces and built something stronger, something ours. Months have passed since that night, and Wild Bloom thrives like never before. Lisa and I run it side by side, her sharp eye for operations complementing my designs. Our shared history turning what could have been rivalry into unbreakable partnership. The cousins call now not for invitations or favors, but for recipes, advice, genuine connection. Michael's trail has gone cold, a postcard from nowhere that simply reads, "Starting over," and I've chosen to let it be. Father's letters arrive monthly from prison, short notes on his reading. His regrets, his quiet pride. No pleas for early release. Just a father learning to be human at last. I look back on that anniversary dinner from hell and see it for what it was, the spark that ignited everything. The moment I cut those cards wasn't just revenge. It was rebirth. And if my story resonates with you, the quiet fights against family expectations, the long road to building something true from ruins, the healing that comes when you least expect it, then hit that subscribe button right now. Join thousands of us who share these journeys every week, turning pain into power. One story at a time. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to cut ties to find your freedom? What's the one moment that changed everything for you? Did my twist with Lisa surprise you? Or the forgiveness with my father? Like, if this hit home, share it with someone who needs to hear they're not alone, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter. Your stories fuel mine. Let's keep blooming wild together. See you in the next one.